Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you, and I'm honored by your presence here with me. Thank you for choosing to spend some of your time here with me. If you can hear the sound of my voice and you are present here on our evening class, if you would do me the honor of raising your hand just to let me know that I can be heard. Shanna, thank you very much. Shamala, Mary, Tess, Wilfred, I'm sorry that I missed you too. Thank you very much for your message. All right. We were actually in the same place at the same time, almost. Maybe next year. All right. So thank you for confirming that I can be heard. And now we will go back to being seen. You can adjust your audio settings and your viewing options in the upper right-hand corner. You need not worry about your microphone or video camera. You can see and hear me. I cannot see or hear you, but you can make your presence known either by raising your hand or typing a question or comment into the Q&A box. And you can do that at any time. I will keep my eye on it. I will ask for questions at the end, but if anything comes up during the course of our discussion, please go ahead and let me know. Our last class, we had a special guest, Pranada Kamtwa, the author of Wise Love, and that was a wonderful conversation about spiritual form in juxtaposition to material form. And we are going to revisit this idea for a little while this evening. We spoke about the masculine and feminine aspects of divinity, specifically as they manifest, specifically the feminine aspects of divinity as they manifest in two forms, Maya Shakti and Bhakti Shakti, the power of illusion and the power of devotion. We covered verses 20 through 25. And this evening, we will finish up chapter 7, a relatively short chapter. We will discuss the Bhagavad Gita's conception of original sin. Because we have a background in Western monotheistic religions, we often look for parallels when we read the Bhagavad Gita. And in this case, we have one, but it's pretty different. So we're going to look at that this evening. We will talk a little bit further about knowledge of relationships, one of the categories of knowledge in the Vedic system of understanding, and how to be all Om Shanti 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 at the most difficult time to be all Om Shanti 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 at the time of death. So we will finish chapter 7 with verses 26 through 30 and take a little look back at the chapter. Before we begin, we will chant our invocation mantra, one simple line. For those of you who are new to the diacritical marks, the dot over the M indicates closing both your lips and the back of your tongue to the roof of your mouth, as if you were wrapping your mouth around a walnut. The bar above a vowel indicates a long and open version of that vowel, as opposed to a short and truncated version. So, here we go. 3 times. I chant, you chant back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Thank you very much. For those of you who are wondering about the invocation mantra, it's traditional to chant a mantra to invoke auspiciousness and for the teacher to recognize their Ishtadevata, the specific form of the Supreme Person who inspires them at the start of a class about transcendental knowledge. So we're going to look at a couple of key verses from last week, but first, some of you may have seen on our Facebook group page that one of our regular participants, Lauren, posted a very, very nice catch, actually. She emailed me to let me know about it. I said, hey, you got to post this. So after returning from a trip, she posted this today, and odds are some of you haven't seen it. Therefore, I'm going to read it to you, and we're going to take a look at what it is she caught and its significance. It's actually extremely cool. So here's her post to our Facebook group. I've recently started following along in the class with a resource I found online that offers both the Sanskrit and English translation of the Gita, as well as commentaries from all four Vaisnava Sampradayas. So, stepping away from what she wrote, just a little explanation. Vaishnava means one who is devoted to Vishnu. That can be Krishna or any of the forms of Vishnu, such as the incarnations, like Rama is an incarnation, Nrsimha, the half man, half lion form, is an incarnation of Vishnu, etc., etc. And Sampradaya indicates a particular lineage, a particular way of understanding that is presented by a particular founding teacher and then carried forward in what we've previously discussed as parampara, or disciplic succession, literally one after the other. So I am speaking from the position of one of these four Vaishnava Sampradayas, and we'll get back to that in just a moment. Continuing with Lauren's post, then I've been checking that against the Veda-based website, which we will also look at in just a moment, which allows you to see examples across different texts of particular Sanskrit words to get a sense of their nuances. In a lot of English translations, I've noticed the word manifest shows up in verses 24 and 25, two of the verses that we covered last week. But if you go back to the Sanskrit, they're actually two entirely different words. Vyaktim in verse 24 and prakasha in 25. I looked at the Veda-based website, and from what I can see, words with vyakta in the root convey a sense of manifesting in a very worldly, material sort of way, whereas prakasha in the next verse seems to be a manifestation in a luminous, effulgent, transcendent, and spiritual way. So it appears to me that across these two verses, Krishna is saying that people who lack wisdom look at him and think, because he's taken a form, that means he's merely something worldly, material, temporary, thinking that anything manifest is by definition lesser than the unmanifest. Consequently, they fail to understand and thus fail to see, even if they see Krishna, that he himself, Krishna, is the ultimate imperishable and undiminished supreme without beginning or end. And then Lauren left links that you can click on, and I'm going to show you where they go. So this was really, really nice homework. Because we were in conversation with Pranada last week, I did not do what I usually do, which is break down the verses in their detail. And Lauren went ahead and did that, and I'm going to show you where she looked to get the information that she's sharing with us. And I wholeheartedly encourage you all to do the same sort of thing. Look for different sources of information about the Sanskrit, compare, and particularly when you see one term repeated, look to see if it's actually the same Sanskrit word and what the implications are. So let's take a look at what Lauren was talking about. So this is the new version of Vedabase. If you go to Vedabase.io, you can also go to vedabase.com and you'll see the old version, and odds are a bar will show up and say, hey, check out the new version here. So this is a database of Vedic knowledge, specifically the books of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And his version of the Bhagavad-gita is right here, so we can click on that, and you can see that it opens up to the table of contents for Srila Prabhupada's edition of Bhagavad-gita. If you go to chapter 7, you will see the English translation of each verse, and if you go to the text number, then you will see that it opens up and you get the Devanagari Sanskrit, you get the transliterated Sanskrit, which is what we've been looking at when we chant individual verses. You get a word-for-word synonym translation before you get Srila Prabhupada's fluent translation and commentary. So there's quite a bit here, and here is avyaktam and vyaktim in the verse. So back to back, we have a translation of avyaktam, non-manifested or unmanifested. The A prior to the rest of the word acts as a negating prefix. So vyaktim or vyaktam would be manifest, avyaktam would be unmanifest. So let's look at vyaktim. Personality is how Srila Prabhupada translates it in the synonym here. And if we look, we find that there are a variety of translations of the word vyaktim depending on how it's used and where it's used. So personality or revelation. Here we have it as manifestation, manifesting as the cause. So now let's go back and take a look at the definition of avyaktam. And we see it is non-manifested, unmanifested, undetected, unseen or unknown, etc. So now let's take a look at what Lauren was seeing when she looked at the different commentaries in the different four Vaisnava Sampradayas. So this is accessible on a website called Bhagavad-gita.org. And if you go, it'll look more or less like this. Well, if you go to the homepage, looks like this, and you see the founders of each of the four sampradayas, or lines of disciplic succession. And then you can go to each chapter of the Gita. You can get it in a variety of languages. And then there are some other nice resources just to get a little deeper understanding of the tradition and back information about how these different sampradayas understand the Bhagavad-gita. So now let's go back. So here we're in chapter 7, text 24. You can even listen to a vocalization of the Sanskrit, which, because of the way I have things set up for our webinar, will not actually play. At least I don't think so. I can't hear it, so I assume you can't hear it. You have, once again, your transliteration. And then down here, as you saw, commentaries of the four authorized Vaisnava Sampradayas. So this is really great because you can look at commentaries from a variety of teachers who all are in general agreement about the ultimate philosophical conclusion of Bhagavad-gita, otherwise known as the Siddhanta, but who are looking at it from different, slightly different angles and illuminating different aspects. So in the Rudra Vaishnava Sampradaya, that is to say the Vaishnava lineage that originates with Shiva, who is considered to be the greatest of Vaishnavas. This particular commentary addresses a question that we also addressed in our last class. One may wonder if the concerted effort to ingratiate oneself to a lesser god or demigod of one's choice is the same concerted effort as offering one's devotion to the Supreme Lord, Krishna. Yet the result is so obviously a vast difference in rewards. Then why doesn't everyone worship Lord Krishna exclusively and abandon the worship of other inferior gods? The question is answered by the word ajananta, meaning oblivious. They are unaware of Lord Krishna being totally transcendental to the material existence and beyond the phenomena of this phenomenal creation, and regard his different avatars or different appearances in the material world or incarnations as manifestations of Prakriti, or the material substratum comprising all existence. Or in other words, they think Krishna's form is material. And Krishna has already indicated that he thinks people who think that his form is made of the same material energy as our bodies are not actually understanding him as he is, missing something important. So now let's go back and take a closer look at the two verses 24 and 25. So here Krishna says, unaware of my higher nature, which is eternal and supreme, those who are less intelligent think of me as a formless existence that has assumed a visible personality. I do not reveal myself to everyone, 25, being hidden by my divine power of illusion. This bewildered world does not recognize me, who am unborn and infallible. So in verse 24, again, avyaktam, vyaktim are the two Sanskrit words that really matter here. Unmanifest personality. So here the idea is that people assume that the highest truth cannot possibly have a form, because that would limit the Supreme Being to that form. The idea of a limitless form, a form that is transcendental to matter, it just doesn't occur to people, oblivious. So, avyaktam, non-manifested, vyaktam can mean personality, revelation, or manifestation. Now, in the next verse, naham prakasha, the key word, prakasha, when we look at definitions there, it means manifest or illumination or effulgence. So it means to reveal or let something transcendental become manifest, to allow someone to see something spiritual. So two very different conceptions of manifest, something manifest in the material world or something manifest as a spiritual revelation. So Krishna's form is a spiritual revelation that not everyone gets to see. And we'll finish up how chapter 7 looks at this particular phenomenon of either being able to see and appreciate Krishna as a transcendental person, or not understanding Krishna as a transcendental person, but rather as a manifestation of a formless transcendence, or as a historical personality, or as an ahistorical personality, but someone whose appearance is dictated by karma, just like you and me. So here are the two URLs. You can go to https database.io, and if you are here in America, if you click on the Bhagavad-gita, it will automatically assume that you want the English language version. It will take you to the library and BG for Bhagavad-gita. You can also go to vedabase.com, and that's another version of the same thing. You can also go to http://bhagavad-gita.org, and that will give you your commentaries of the 4 Vaisnava Sampradayas. And if you have any questions about that, go ahead and pop your questions into the Q&A box. And while I await your questions, I will proceed with reading the translations of this week's verses, and then we will move forward from there. So here we go. Beginning now with text 26 in the 7th chapter. Krishna is speaking. "O Arjuna, I know the past, present, and future of all beings. None of them know me. O descendant of Bharat, scorcher of foes," Krishna continues in verse 27. "All beings enter this world in a state of delusion, bewildered by dualities that arise from desire and hostility." Text 28. "Those whose misdeeds have come to an end, whose actions have been virtuous, and who are free from the bewilderment of dualities, express their love for me with firm vows." Text 29. "Striving for liberation from old age and death, those who take refuge in me are situated in absolute transcendence, having obtained a complete understanding of the principle of the higher self and the intricacies of action." Text 29. "Those whose minds are absorbed in thought of me, who know me to be the highest principle of divinity, as well as the governing principle of the material manifestation of all the demigods and of all methods of sacrifice, can know me even at the time of death." And let's just take a look. I may have skipped something. Let me just double check. Oh, okay. Yeah, that was verse 30. I repeated that it was 29, but actually that last verse was verse 30. All right. So now let's go back and look at these verses in some more detail. So once again, verse 26. "O Arjuna, I know the past, present, and future of all beings. None of them know me." So if this sounds familiar, that's because it is familiar, because back in the 4th chapter, Krishna has already indicated to Arjuna his omniscience in this regard. Krishna begins the 4th chapter by telling Arjuna that he spoke this same knowledge of yoga previously in the beginning to the sun god, who then spoke to his son, and the chain of disciplic succession begins. The original teaching is given, and Arjuna says, "Hey, hold the phone. I've known you your whole life." And the sun god is much, much older than you. So how is it possible you could have spoken to him? And there Krishna replies, "You and I have passed through many births. I remember all of them. O subduer of the enemy, you do not." So we find once again the elliptical nature of the Bhagavad-gita. Krishna is coming back to go a little deeper into something that he's already spoken about in order to facilitate Arjuna's understanding. In the next verse, 27, this is where we find the conception of original sin as conceived in the Bhagavad-gita. O descendant of Bharat, scorcher of foes, all beings enter this world in a state of delusion, bewildered by dualities that arise from desire and hostility. So these two elements, these two feelings arise somehow or other in the heart of a living being, and that triggers our entry into the material world. Here's how. Original sin in the Bhagavad-gita is the desire and hostility in relationship to Krishna himself. So what is the desire? The desire is to be the controller, Ishvara, Krishna, to be in Krishna's position as the supreme controller of everything, to be essentially the center of the universe. And the hostility arises out of envy. So you could actually use the word envy here just as well. Envy of the one person who is qualified to hold the position that we covet. That is to say, the one person who actually is the omniscient and omnipotent controller of everything. The one who actually is at the center of the universe, who is the universe, who is beyond the universe. So psychologists will tell you, they'll probably tell me too, that envy is perhaps the biggest motivating factor for action in the world. People want something that someone else has. We see someone with something that we want, and out of envy we strive to acquire that same exact thing. So much advertising shows us happy people who have this thing that we're now supposed to want. And if you are cursed with the kind of envious mentality that I have, then you may even feel resentful of the person who has the thing that you don't have, that you want. In a corollary scripture or yoga wisdom text called the Srimad Bhagavatam, the fourth canto, fourth portion of this epic text, there is the story of Sati, the wife of Lord Shiva, who goes to visit her father while he is performing a great sacrifice. I believe I've spoken about this story before. She goes without Shiva because Shiva doesn't want to go because he doesn't like Daksha. Daksha, his father-in-law, doesn't like him. And after Sati arrives, rather than welcoming her, her father, Daksha, insults her husband, doesn't welcome her properly at all. She gets really mad, decides that she doesn't want the body that was given to her by her father, and sits down in the middle of the sacrificial arena that has been arranged for a great ceremony and self-immolates. And when Shiva hears about it, he is understandably really, really mad. He pulls out a lock of his matted hair, throws it to the ground, and a great manifestation of Shiva's anger appears, goes to the sacrificial arena with an entourage of Shiva's followers, and proceeds to cut off Daksha's head and toss it away. Well, understandable though that may be, the assassination of Daksha is not actually very good for universal affairs, and so demigods, led by the chief among the demigods, Lord Brahma, go to Lord Shiva to pacify him and see if he can do something to rectify the difficult situation he has caused. So in the course of praising Lord Shiva for all of his wonderful and magnanimous qualities, Brahma offers this verse. Quote, persons who observe everything with differentiation, who are simply attached to fruitive activities, who are mean-minded, who are always pained to see the flourishing conditions of others, and who thus give distress to them by uttering harsh and piercing words, have already been killed by providence. Thus there is no need for them to be killed again by an exalted personality like you. So this was painful to read because I just thought, yeah, that's me. I make all kinds of differentiations. I am afflicted with delusions born of dualities. I am attached to the results of my actions. I always want to get something for whatever it is I do. I'm more mean-minded than I would ever let you know. I'm always pained to see others flourishing when I am not. Ugh. Other people succeeding. And I thus give, I don't give distress by uttering harsh and piercing words, because usually I'm in my car and the other drivers can't hear me. Anyway, you get the idea. Here's some commentary from A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, whose translation I have read to you. Persons who are materialistic and always engaged in fruitive activities, that is to say, action where one seeks to enjoy the results of the action, for material profit, cannot endure seeing the flourishing life of others. Except for a few persons, the entire world is full of such envious persons who are perpetually full of anxieties because they are attached to the material body and are without self-realization. Since their hearts are always filled with anxiety, it is understood that they have already been killed by providence. Thus, Lord Shiva, as a self-realized Vaishnava, we remember that Shiva is actually the founder of one of the Vaisnava Sampradayas, or the lineages of understanding of Vishnu. He was advised not to kill Daksha. Well, Daksha's already dead at this point, so we're going to see later in this story how Shiva, by his mystic potency, rectifies the situation. A Vaishnava is described as paradukha dukhi, because although he is never distressed in any condition of life, he is distressed to see others in a distressed condition. A Vaishnava, therefore, should not try to kill anyone by any action of the body or mind, but should try to revive their Krishna consciousness out of compassion. I'm going to come back to this phrase, Krishna consciousness. It's an interesting way of saying fixing one's mind or always being aware of Krishna. And that's going to relate to the verses that we're going to look at moving forward once again. So this state of mind of really only being distressed by seeing the distressed condition of others is exactly the opposite of the materially inflamed condition of always being in distress because one does not have what others have, not coveting. Now let's move forward and see how this relates to the next few verses. Those whose misdeeds, this is now text 28 again, those whose misdeeds have come to an end, whose actions have been virtuous, and who are free from the bewilderment of dualities, express their love for me with firm vows. So all beings, in the previous verse, we saw that all beings enter the world in a state of delusion that arises from dualities, the state of delusion, and are bewildered by dualities that arise from envy and hate, or desire and hostility. But here, Krishna is saying you can rise above that. So even though our condition in the beginning may be one of enviousness and hostility or anger, frustration at not having our desires fulfilled, when we come to a state of knowledge, when we understand something about what the material world is, who we are, how we got into this situation, and how to rectify the situation so that we can endeavor in such a way as to experience sustainable happiness, then the project of the purification of our desires, the purification of our heart, the elevation of our consciousness becomes our priority. And we cease to engage in the kind of activities that generate the bad karmic reactions that propel us deeper and deeper into bewilderment. Instead, our actions become virtuous. What is a virtuous action? A virtuous action is an action that is meant for the benefit of others. Therefore, one who acts in such a way as to relieve the distress of others rather than competing with others for limited material resources is someone we understand to be a virtuous person. And at the point of freedom from bewilderment due to the rectification of action and the purification of desires, one develops a desire to cultivate love for the Supreme Person. And therefore, one takes firm vows that act as expressions of love, or step it down a little bit, as an expression of the intention to cultivate feelings of love. Now, another kind of person is described in the next verse. Striving for liberation from old age and death, those who take refuge in me are situated in absolute transcendence, having obtained a complete understanding of the principle of the higher self and the intricacies of action. So there are 4 stages of material life. Material virtue, acting in a virtuous way, but with a material desire. And we discussed this in the earlier sections of the Gita with regard to the difference between karma and karma yoga. So one who abides by religious principles with a material motivation, then economic development, that is to say, one reaps the good karmic rewards of their virtuous material behavior. Then the gratification of the senses is next. One cashes in, basically, on their good karma and enjoys the fruits of their actions, hence fruitive activity. And eventually, one may get the idea that now you have to do it all over again. You have to go through the abiding by the principles of material religiosity in order to gain the results of your virtuous activities in the form of the facility to enjoy one's senses and again and again and again, because it's not sustainable. You have to keep going back. It's like your car. You have to keep going back to the gas pump to fill it up, or you'll run out of gas. And eventually, one might come to the point of thinking, how do I get out of this rat race? And therefore, at that point, one starts to inquire about the nature of material existence and pursue the project of liberation from material existence. So the person being described here is that person who is striving for liberation from the repetition of this cycle, which inevitably involves getting old and dying and taking birth in a material body once again and going through the whole thing. I mean, how many of you actually want to go through high school again. No, I don't, actually. However, however rosy I may remember some aspects of it, yeah, most of us tests are like that. You know, been there, done that, don't want to do it again. So, one who pursues the path of liberation and who takes shelter of Krishna, or who sees Krishna as their refuge, as their basically as their ticket out, understand Brahman, or absolute transcendence, and develop spiritual characteristics by virtue of choosing to approach Krishna for their liberation rather than trying to do it themselves. And then finally, those whose minds are absorbed in thoughts of me, who know me to be the highest principle of divinity, as well as the governing principle of the material manifestation of all the demigods and all the methods of sacrifice, can know me even at the time of death. So there's your Om Shanti Shanti, at the time of death. And this is the verse that we're going to chant together this evening. Whoops. And here we go. So this is verse 30 from chapter 7, the concluding verse. I will chant, and you can chant back, one line at a time. Here we go. Sadhi bhutadi dhaivam mam sadhi jagyam chaye viduhu Vayana kale pichamam evidur yukta chetasaha. Right, the last two words, yukta chetasaha. Chetasaha, as in chitta, mind, and yukta, the root word yuj, present in yukta, meaning connecting, similar to yoga, union. So those two words are important here, as our translation is those whose minds are absorbed in thoughts of me. So this is another way of saying yukta chetasaha, mind absorbed in, linked to me through meditative absorption, who know me to be the highest principle of divinity as well as the governing principle of the material manifestation. All the demigods and of all methods of sacrifice can know me even at the time of death. Now compare this to the last verse of the last chapter. Here is the last verse of chapter 7. And if we remember, or go back to the last verse of chapter 6, it goes like this. And of all types of yogis, those who always abide in me, think of me within themselves, and with complete faith engage in devotional service to me, are most intimately united with me in, and in my opinion, is the greatest of all. So here at the end of chapter 7, Krishna is echoing the opinion that he expressed at the end of chapter 6, saying something very, very similar in a slightly different way, but the same principle of mind absorbed in thoughts of me, always thinking of me within themselves, always abiding in me, knowing me to be the governing principle of everything. So this is what Srila Prabhupada means when he uses this interesting phrase that he coined, Krishna consciousness, to be conscious of Krishna in all things, at all times, in all places, and in all circumstances. So it's a very, very snappy, pithy way of describing this state of being, this state of consciousness, the state of mind that Krishna is describing in these verses. Simply always being aware of him in every time, place, and circumstance. If you have any questions, I will be happy to take them. So please feel free to pop a question in the Q&A box. Meanwhile, let's just take a look back at this chapter. This chapter, for all intents and purposes, is about how to know Krishna. Krishna is speaking about himself. He has pivoted from a discussion of karma to a discussion of the mystic yoga system to a discussion of himself, who he is, and how one can understand him without having any doubt about who he is and what the relationship is. We, during the course of this chapter, took a look at the theological issue of what is God's relationship to the world. And in the course of doing that, I gained a much deeper appreciation for Michelangelo and how this particular portion of his painting really conveys a sense of power. I spent actually a fair amount of time looking at his painting of God flying through the heavens, reaching out to the finger of Adam to give him the spark of life. And it's really quite remarkable. And early on in the course of our look at this chapter, we compared different conceptions of God's relationship to the world. The idea of God as creator, who is separate and apart from the universe. The idea of the universe being contained within the power or presence of God. The idea that we invent God, that God, the concept of God is a human invention born of necessity to explain the inexplicable. And here, what we find is the Bhagavad-gita presents something different from all three of these ideas. The idea that there's a complete absolute truth that contains everything, that there's nothing outside of, and yet that complete absolute truth has a form. And that person who has this form, who is actually not different from the form, is the origin of the world, whose energies make up this material world, and that same person enters into the world for the sake of guiding us back out, and the entire world is contained within that person. So we get a very, very psychedelic, trippy idea from this conception of the all-inclusive supreme being that is within everything, whose energy composes everything, and who is beyond everything all at the same time. The other things that we looked at during the course of our time in chapter 7 were the feminine aspect of divinity, and how to account for the feminine aspect of divinity when she doesn't seem so immediately present in the Bhagavad-gita. At least at first glance, we don't see her, but a deeper understanding of Bhagavad-gita, as per our conversation last time with Pranada Kantwa, reveals that the feminine aspect of divinity is present as both the embodiment of pure spiritual love and the divine power of illusion behind which Krishna hides his true identity from those who seek happiness in material life. So in this 7th chapter, we saw how Krishna does not reveal himself to just anyone, just as we only truly reveal ourselves to those who love us and whom we therefore trust. Krishna also chooses not to reveal himself to everyone, and those who are not inclined to turn towards Krishna either for the fulfillment of their material desires, or to be relieved from a distressed condition, or simply to gain knowledge for the sake of knowledge or liberation from this world, those folks remain bewildered by the dualities arising from their material consciousness, and Krishna hides behind this energy that separates him from their view. Even if they hear of Krishna, see Krishna, and directly read his words where he says, "This is who I am," still, somehow or other, people will not accept this. So this is Krishna's, this is the feminine aspect of divinity that hides Krishna from the view of those who withhold their love from him, and facilitates proximity, intimacy between Krishna and those who do offer their love to him. And then finally, we ended with this discussion of Krishna's position as a transcendental person whose spiritual form lies beyond the demigods, beyond the impersonal transcendence of Brahman, and Krishna is the bestower of liberation for those who take shelter of him. So that brings us to the end of this chapter and a quick review of the 7th chapter. We covered the Gita's conception of original sin, and this idea of dualities born of desire and envy, knowledge of relationships and understanding of how Krishna is interacting with different kinds of people, how to be chill, even at the time of death, by being absorbed in thought of Krishna. We finished up our last 4 verses and took a look back at the chapter. Okay. Any questions? If you don't have any questions now, or if you are watching or listening to this later, after the fact, and you have questions, please send them my way. I'm always very happy to hear from you. Hari@Hari-kirtana.com is where you can find me. Please also remember to post any questions, comments, or good catches in our Bhagavad-gita Satsang Facebook group. Next week, chapter 8, we will begin the yoga of attaining the Supreme. Arjuna requests a recap with more questions. It's hard to believe, but yes, Arjuna still has some doubts and needs some clarification. He wants Krishna to revisit yet again some of these same topics, and now we will see how Krishna takes Arjuna even deeper, and fortunately us along with him, into the topics of karma, understanding what is Brahman, etc. So we'll look at Krishna's recap as well. He will describe once again what is Brahman, and since Brahman is limitless, there can be limitless explanations of Brahman. He will also discuss the Paramatma, karma, the demigods, and sacrifice. And then we'll see that he segues back into how all this relates to the mystic process of yoga. So once again, the elliptical story structure of the Bhagavad-gita. And Krishna will give advice for people who are going to die. Now, if you know anybody who is eventually but inevitably going to die, this is going to be a great class for them. I highly recommend that you get in touch with any of these people who are going to die and share the link. Invite them to come to the class and hear Krishna's advice for them. This, of course, probably doesn't apply to you, but you may know someone to whom this might apply. So let people know about this. Let people know that we have these classes and they can come and get some good advice from Krishna. We will cover verses 1 through 7 next week. And here's our last call for questions. If you have anything on your mind that you would like to share with me, any thoughts or comments, I wholeheartedly recommend that you avail yourself of the 2 links that I shared earlier. You can go back and look up some of the different commentaries from the 4 Vaisnava Sampradayas on these concluding verses of the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita. All right. I'm always very, very happy to see you and happy to know that you are seeing me even if you are not here when we do this live. So thank you very, very much for choosing to spend your time with me. It is always a great pleasure for me to be here with you and an honor to know that you are spending some time with me. I look forward to seeing you all next time. And I hope you have a very wonderful rest of your week. Until then. Have a nice night.